Good evening, Facebook. It's me. It's about 9:30, and I wanted to come on and talk about something that I've been meaning to for a while, and it's one of those things where the concept is pretty abstract, and so I've been trying to I've been wrestling with how I want to present it, what kind of wording I want to use, that type of stuff, and I think I kind of finally have a handle on it, so I'm going to give it a shot tonight. It's possible that this could end up being like a multi-part kind of thing if I feel like I need to come back later and flesh out some parts of it. But I'm going to give it a shot tonight and see if I can do it in one go. So the title of the stream tonight is "Deceived by the Obvious." um, what do I mean by that? If you've known me for any amount of time, and we've had discussions about my take on biblical prophecy, on current events, all that stuff, and how they're connected, you'll know that I have some pretty unorthodox views on how this is all going down. I've pretty much come to the conclusion that anything that's out there as far as prophetic teachers, your Perry Stones, your Mark Biltz's, Jonathan Cahn's, whoever, out there talking about what's going to happen in the end times. If there's a well-known person out there saying it's going to happen a certain way, we can pretty much bet that it's not going to happen that way. Because the moment we get to the point to where we can predict with certainty what is going to happen in the end, this much ahead of time, we have basically put ourselves, I think, in Yahweh's place. Yahshua, when he was here with his first advent, said that he didn't even know when it was going to come. He didn't know the day or the hour. But yet we have, your Joe Dumons. You had different people who were putting together charts, trying to put together a date on when it's going to happen. You have in many cases, you have people who have tried that and failed. I pointed to 2018 a little while back as a failed date that you had so many teachers jumping on that bandwagon, and for sure he was going to come in 2018, and it didn't happen. And the reason why I think so many people have missed it is because we've had our eyes too much on the obvious. And that sounds kind of strange. Maybe it's like, well, something that's obvious, of course our eyes are going to be on it because it's obvious, right? But it's always been my position that if the devil's job in these last days is to deceive even the elect, he's not going to be able to do that by putting everything out there in the open as something that's obvious. Case in point, I was looking at the news, whatever. We had Brexit lately, recently, and Britain leaving the European Union. And of course, almost any time you have an article dealing with the EU, there's a picture of their headquarters in Brussels. And it's well known that when that building was designed and constructed, it was done in such a way that it would mimic the Tower of Babel. And of course, if we know our story from the book of Genesis, the Tower of Babel was all the people of the known world at that time coming together with one language and one accord, and to basically build a tower where they themselves could reach the heavens. And of course, who dwells in the heavens but the Most High? So this is human beings taking it upon themselves to unite together to basically storm the gates of heaven and put themselves in that place where they don't belong. And of course, it didn't go well for them. Yahweh stepped in and he destroyed the tower. He split them up, spread them out across the known land, divided the languages, and so he put a quash on their plans to do that. So the European Union has their building modeled after that. And, the obvious thing that they're trying to communicate by doing that is that we want to reunite the world in the pursuit of what was happening at Babel. We want to aspire to the heavens, basically, as a united humanity starting in Europe. And that's the obvious thing. It's a world government. Europe is basically a branch of the world government, the EU. You look at the UN, and it's kind of the same overall model. You've got this bureaucracy of people who are unelected, unaccountable, basically, who are running the world. And the EU is just that model on a little bit smaller scale. Um, but when you look at um, things that are obvious, we read our Bibles, and pretty much this is where it gets a little abstract. You go to Revelation, and it talks about we all know the call to come out of her, my people, come out of Babylon. And that has historically been interpreted as, come out of the beast kingdom that it talks about earlier in Revelation, like specifically for chapter 13. Come out of that system. And, Protestants have historically pinned that on Rome, and they have rightly shown that a good deal of Roman Catholicism's rites and rituals and doctrines come straight out of Babylonian paganism. What those Protestants failed to see is that a lot of the customs that they have carried over from the Catholic Church come from those same roots. So while they protested, they did not protest enough. Christmas, Easter, things like that. Now we know that the modern kind of renaissance of that thinking, as far as I can trace it, goes back to Alexander Hislop in the 1800s with his book The Two Babylons, and that was a groundbreaking book, and I haven't read through the whole thing personally, but I'm familiar with its points. And for the time, it was very very thorough, and it was very um, just an in-depth treatise on where the church's pagan customs come from. They go back to ancient Babylon, Babylonian religions. And modern scholarship has shown, because we have access to more information now, we have access to more texts, more writings and things from that time period, that some of his conclusions were incorrect. He did the best he could with the information he had back then. I don't think he was trying to be deceitful or anything, but modern scholarship has shown that he was wrong on some things. And so that has led us to have this idea that coming out of Babylon is coming out of this religious system. This if you're a Protestant, it's the Catholics. If it's the Catholics, it's this worldly system. It's mammon, whatever. And I think there's something to that. But when you look at, I'm kind of hinting on a teaching I'll do later at some point once I have it all together. But when you look at the coming out of Babylon in a literal, how it's presented literally in the book of Revelation, the whole thing in context, it's talking about coming out of a city that is about to be subject to a siege and destruction. Just like with Jerusalem in 70 AD, you can see the Romans starting to surround the city. You better get out of Dodge before everything goes down. So come out of her, my people, come out of Babylon. Because all her plagues will come upon her in one day, and she'll burn, and all that. That's siege language. That's exactly, you see that same language all through the Bible whenever a city is about to be destroyed by siege. So yes, we can take the principle and we can say, come out of spiritual Babylon, come out of the world system, etc., etc. But you have a lot of people who take that, to the extreme of, I'm just going to go totally off grid. I'm going to buy a house out in the Ozarks and just, live off the land, come completely out of Babylon. And that's well and good, but I think it's kind of missing the point. So where I'm going with that is that we have this whole concept of what that means to come out of Babylon. How do we define that concept of Babylon, the system, right? If you've done any kind of, this is one of the things that I first started to see when I guess had my eyes opened in my early 20s. I came across a book by Ralph Epperson called The Unseen Hand. Now, if you've read this book, you'll realize it is a punch to the gut. He exposes so much that is going on in the world, with the United Nations, with the ruling families in the world, and he just lays it bare. And he's got other works that he's done too, but that's the one that I'm the most familiar with. You've got William Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse. You've got all these different books out there that in detail talk about what's going on behind the scenes, with the world government. We know about the infamous New World Order, right? We know about the push to globalism. We know about the occult agenda behind the UN. It's out there. You can see this. It's not just some tinfoil hat theory. The UN in their charter dedicates everything to the earth goddess Gaia. And they even have an ark made up with all this esoteric, metaphysical earth worship stuff going on, okay? We know that there are a handful of ultra-rich families, such as the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, behind the scenes that run everything. It's known. It's not just some conspiracy theory, right? We know factually that a good deal of the power families involved are involved in secret societies. We hear terms like Illuminati, Council or Committee of 300, the Bilderbergers, Bohemian Grove, etc., etc., the Freemasons, you know, Opus Dei, the Jesuits. I mean, I could name dozens and dozens of secret societies that are proven to be behind the scenes the ones running everything at the global level, and even on down to the local levels in many cases. So this is not some kind of thing where you just have a few crackpots sitting around getting crazy ideas. This is stuff that's been well researched over the decades. It's stuff that's out there in the open, and any amount of research, just it doesn't take a lot. You can find, if you don't trust the internet, you can go to your local library and find a lot of this stuff in the encyclopedias. It's not a big deal. And so that kind of gets into my thought process on deception by the obvious. Okay. Now, all those organizations I just mentioned, all these secret societies, right? Now, how do we know so much about these secret societies if they're so secret? I mean, we have detailed information on Masonic rituals, how they do things, the different degrees of initiation, second, third degree initiation, the oaths they take, all that stuff, right? We have the books out there, Morals and Dogma. You have stuff written by Albert Pike, Manly Hall, things like this that go into detail about the Masonics' religious beliefs and their rituals and rites. And, you've got um, you've got lots of writing out there about the inner workings of the Illuminati as far as the occult end of it. You've got people who have come out claiming to be former members. They write books, they expose it and everything. And I've just come to the point to where, like, yeah, there's probably a lot of truth to that. But my question is, if they're so powerful, and if they're so good at keeping this stuff secret, how do we know so much about it? How do we know all the details of how the Masons work? And how do we have lists of families involved in the upper levels of the New World Order? And how do we know, I mean, where did Ralph Epperson get his information? You know, all of this information is available to us out in the open. We can look into the background of the Rockefellers and we can see all the evil that they've been a part of. George Soros comes to mind in modern times. I mean, he's a multi-billionaire who is pulling the strings behind some of the most sinister globalist agendas that you can possibly think of. I mean, the guy is an evil man, you know, but yet everything he's doing is out in the open. We know who he's supporting. We know who he's pushing in different political campaigns. We know what his agenda is. We know where his money's going to. We know what he's funding. There's no secret. And he's just one of many. So all of this stuff is out there in the open for us to see, but yet it's supposed to be some big secret, right? They're supposed to be pulling the wool over our eyes. They're supposed to be, leading us from behind the scenes in secret, but yet we have all this information. And over the years, people have begun to become aware of this. People have begun to wake up. You see it over in Europe. You have countries that are standing up to the EU. Poland, Hungary, a couple of them that are openly trying to push back the EU's immigration agenda. With all the Middle Eastern immigrants flooding, taking over Europe, they're trying to stem the tide on that. They're basically standing up to the EU. You have the English finally kind of getting a handle on what's going on and being like, we don't want to be a part of this, so we're out of here. I mean, people are starting to see it. And here in America, Donald Trump got elected because people have their eyes open and they see what's going on with the George Soroses of the world and they're sick of it. So there is a populist public wave of opposition that's coming to fruition around the globe against the New World Order, against the Illuminati, against the ruling oligarchies and their classes. And my thought process is, okay, if these guys really have all the control that we think they do, how are they allowing this to happen? Right? How are they allowing all this information to get out about them that people have easy access to and are able to use this information to make up their own minds and to shape public opinion to an extent to where you can have whole nations that are beginning to rebel against the New World Order? How does that happen? And I'm of the mind anymore that it's intentional. Okay? And here's why. Okay? If you know anything about the Hegelian dialectic, you know that when someone wants to do something, they have to. I mean, you could just do it if you have the power, right? Who cares what you think if you have the power? Just impose your will. But when you're dealing with things on a global level, you can't just do that because you're dealing with 7+ billion people who could potentially rebel against that agenda. So what you have to do is you have to find a way to manipulate them into wanting your desired outcome. So as an example, and I realize that what I'm about to say here is controversial, but it is what it is. Let's say your agenda is to turn public schools into basically prisons for children, right? We know that on some level that's already happened because schools are being used to indoctrinate our youth into ideals that are anti-family, anti-Christian, morals that are definitely questionable. We know that they're teaching things in schools and they're not telling the parents. In some cases they're teaching kids as young as first or second grade about deviant sex and then not telling the parents. And when the parents say, hey, what are you teaching my kids? Well, we're not going to tell you, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so our schools are basically becoming mental prisons for many of the children. Okay, so that's, you might be pro-public school, you might be against it, but I don't think we can argue that that's kind of what's happening, at least on some level. And I'm sure it varies depending on school district, depending on demographics, but across the board, that's kind of what we're looking at. So let's say you want to complete that process and you want to turn the public schools into full-on prisons. Okay, what do prisons have? They have a captive group of people, and they are kept captive by force. You have armed guards in a prison, right? So you have to create. You can't just if one day the school districts all just decided, hey, we're going to put paramilitary forces in the schools, and you can complain all you want, parents, but we're going to do it anyway. There would be a huge revolt. Parents wouldn't take it, and rightfully so. But if you can rig up a way, if you can find a way to make the parents want that, and if you can find a way to make the parents ask for that, then that's how you do it. And so what you do, and again, this is controversial. I'm sorry if this rocks your boat or hurts your feelings or whatever, but you end up with, you push a culture where you have a bunch of messed up kids who don't know how to communicate their feelings. You push psychotropic drugs on them, and a few of those kids are going to react to that in a negative way. They will inevitably come and shoot up a school, do something violent. And, this happens for years and years and years and years and decades. And finally, the public gets so sick of it that they're like, we have to defend ourselves against this threat. We want armed police guards in the schools so that if one of these kids does go nuts, and brings a pistol or an AR-15 or whatever into school to shoot up his class, there's a trained presence there to counter that. And that's a reasonable thing to do, right? If you have a threat, you're well within your rights to counter that threat and protect your loved ones. So, but what they've done is they have manipulated us into begging for armed guards in our schools. So their whole objective has been to turn our schools into prisons, and they've got us manipulated into a point to where we're begging for that to happen. And we don't really have a choice at this point. They kind of forced us into it, But that's kind of how it works. That's how the Hegelian dialectic works. Is you have your ultimate solution, and you have to create a problem and a counter problem that work together. They oppose each other, and then that causes people to want your solution. You happen to be there, the knight in shining armor who's able to step in and save the day. Well, guess what? You're the one that created the problem to begin with. You managed the problem, and then now you're the one providing the solution. That's how it works. Okay? So, the Illuminati, the New World Order, I think anymore that they have allowed their workings to become public knowledge and to become obvious as part of that deception. I think that they have allowed themselves, and I say allowed, it makes it sound more passive. I think it's got more intent than that. I think that they have put themselves in a position to be a straw man because it is so open. And I've made comments before, like with in America with the left versus right paradigm, liberals versus conservatives. The liberals these days are doing some of the craziest stuff. Every time Nancy Pelosi opens her mouth, it's literally the dumbest thing I've heard. I lose brain cells when AOC opens her mouth. They say the most outrageous things. We've got President Trump being impeached for something that Joe Biden confessed to, right? I mean, it's so upside down and backwards, and it's so obvious, and it's like they either think we're stupid or they're counting on us picking up on this, and I think it's the latter. I think that they are acting a part, that they're all in cahoots. Yes, it is a conspiracy. And I think that you have people on the left who are playing the role of a straw man to work up the ire of the right. It's my perception based on scripture, what I see, and I've done videos on YouTube where I discuss this in more depth. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail tonight. But I think that what we're looking at when we get into Revelation with the beast, the end times beast, I think it is going to be some form of, I don't know if it'll be global, but it will have a global impact, at least as far as influence. Some type of a Christian power. And I know that sounds crazy to some, but I think that I can make the case for it, and I'll maybe do that in another stream at some point, kind of in more detail. But assuming that's the case, how do you go about doing that? Let's say that if you're watching this and you want to think of it as like counterfeit Christianity, that's fine. Either way, whatever it is going to call itself Christianity. It's going to call itself like biblical Christianity. That's what it's going to be presented as. Now, whether we believe that falls in line with accurate biblical Christianity or not, I'm not going to get into that. But I think that's how it's going to be presented. So, how do you we look around us and we see, Christianity appears to be on the decline, right? Here in America, you have more and more youth dropping out of church. They're going into witchcraft. They're going to atheism, all these different things. Europe is just, Christianity seems like it's being crushed over there, right? And I think that that's part of the plan. I think that the leftist forces, in conjunction with Islam, are collectively, and I put this under the umbrella of globalist New World Order because they're all kind of the same thing. You see, the globalists, the New World Order types, are the ones who are they're you can't say anything negative about Islam, right? You can't criticize Islam. You can't, we just have to accept it, right? If you're in Europe, if you're in Sweden, sucks to be you because, they have every right to come and rape your women. It's their culture, right? You can't defend yourselves. Well, those nations are historically Christian nations. And you have movements over there right now in the Nordic countries where the men are beginning to get fed up. They're organizing militias with the intent of physically fighting back against the Muslim immigration invasion. And I think that that's kind of part of the point. I think that the left, the globalist left, in cahoots with Islam, is poking the bear, and by the bear I mean the Christian right, with the intent of raising that up and propelling it to power. I think that the left is being used as a straw man to basically a punching bag, because what do you do when you want to unite people? They need a common enemy, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if Christianity, we've got 30 something thousand denominations in Christianity, all bickering about justification, all the rites and rituals, music in the church. Can we have distortion in our guitars, or can we even have guitars? I mean, all this stuff, right? This is what we're all divided over. Okay? And Ronald Reagan came out in the 80s, and he kind of, people interpret it literally, but I think he was just using it as like a metaphor. And he talked about, just imagine, we're all divided now, and we're all bickering and fighting, and we have all these wars. And what if there was some extraterrestrial threat that came along, like aliens from outer space? And you see this in Independence Day, right, with Bill Pullman and Jeff Goldblum. What happens? You have this external threat that comes, and the world's nations have to unite together. They have to temporarily put aside their differences, and they have to unite against this common enemy. And I think that the left, the globalist left, is presenting itself as that enemy that will be used to unite the Christian right globally and catapult it into global power. I really am starting to see that. Just because of the absurdity of what they're doing. There's no subtlety anymore. And like I mentioned earlier, if these guys are so great at keeping secret, and if they have so much power, then either they have grossly miscalculated our intelligence, or they're counting on us being intelligent, and they're expecting us to pick up on what they're doing and react in a way that they anticipate and is what they wanted the whole time. Hopefully you're tracking with me so far. If you're watching this, hopefully that makes sense. So that's what I mean by being deceived by the obvious. Okay, the obvious is, well, the New World Order obviously wants to control the world, globalism and all this stuff. I think that that's the deception. I think that that's the straw man that's been presented to us. I think it was always intended to fall, and I think it will fall. I think that you will see the populist thing that you see with like Brexit with Nigel Farage. You see it in some of the European countries. You see it with Trump. I fully expect that to pick up and spread. I fully expect him to get a second term. I fully expect him to, the stuff that he's doing is going to really continue, and you're going to eventually have, because I have to be careful what I say here because of Facebook's algorithms and stuff. But if you think about it logically, the left versus right battle here in America, what's it going to come to? Do we really? Even with Trump draining the swamp, right? He can't do it alone. He's one man, right? You still have Congress at the federal level. You have state Congresses. You have all the local stuff. So the only way that we have any hope to defeat, the globalists, the Illuminati, etc., the left, whatever you want to call it, politically, is if we are able to put good, solid, conservative, moral candidates in office every place we can, and do it consistently for decades. And yeah, it would be great if that happened. It'd be fantastic. But I just don't see that happening. So short of that happening, what's the options? Are we just going to sit and just let the left control everything? Are we just going to let them, indoctrinate our kids on the LGBTQ agenda? Are we going to let them turn us into China, where they force families to have abortions if they've already had 2 kids or whatever? Where's the threshold where, oh, well, now you've gone too far. Now the buck stops here, right? Where does that happen? And how is it enforced? What's the Overton window look like on this? So at some point, if we can't hold back the left politically, there's only one other option, and it's going to go hot. It has to. I don't encourage that. I don't want that to happen. But logically, if there's no political solution, that's the only logical solution to beat back the left. It really is, and that's what they're faced with in Europe right now. They're faced with the option that's been forced on them because there is no political solution to actually take up arms and fight for their families. And so, if that happens, if that happens, I think there's a very real probability that the Christian right will come out victorious. I fully expect it. And I fully expect, based on what I see in Revelation, if this is true, that there will be signs and wonders involved in this. There will be miracles. There will be supernatural things happening. Because, it's David and Goliath, right? Goliath is the juggernaut New World Order. David is Christianity, right? Our numbers are dwindling. We're under attack worldwide. How is this going to happen? So I think that if that happens, then you end up with this Christian power that is the beast in Revelation. And I think that it will be headed by a person who claims to be, I don't know if he will claim to be Jesus specifically, or if he will claim to be under that authority, or how that will work. But I think that there will be a connection, because if it's going to get so bad that even the elect could be deceived. Now consider yourself. If you're watching this, I'm hoping that you're part of the elect. Now, are you going to be deceived by a Muslim coming along claiming to be, Messiah, claiming to be the head of the church, whatever? No. If you're a Protestant watching this, are you going to be convinced by the Pope? No. Who are you going to be convinced by? The only person that's going to fool you into thinking he's the returned Jesus is someone who looks exactly like the returned Jesus, right? That's the only thing that's going to work. If you have a brain and you know your Bible, you're not going to be fooled unless somebody comes around looking like the real thing. That's the only thing. So the only way that that's going to happen is we have to have a Jesus figure in charge of a global Christian power. That's the only logical way that I can see it working. And the only way that I can see that coming to fruition is if you have a setup first involving a straw man to unite Christians together against a common enemy to bring them into power as a unified bloc. Call me crazy, but that's logically the only way this works out in my mind, okay? So I'm going to take a sip of coffee, catch my breath. Hang on just a second. And my coffee got cold. Figures. Okay. So I'm going to segue into the next part of this. I was actually going to do this as a separate teaching, but it's relevant. I'm going to include it with this one. And I'm going to talk about the Serpent King. Okay? Now, at this point, you're like, James totally lost his mind. He's talking about the Serpent King. Okay? Now, I just spent all this time talking about the setup. Why we have this straw man New World Order. What's its purpose? Why are all their secrets so out in the open? Why are we so I mean, Rush Limbaugh every day is telling you what the Democrats are going to do before they do it. Now Rush Limbaugh is a very intelligent guy, but come on, it's not rocket science to see what the left is doing here. It's not rocket science to get out ahead of them and look at the agenda. Okay? So I want to take a look at, if you're watching this and you believe that Yahshua, that the Messiah, is going to return, okay, you probably have seen it yourself or heard it taught that King David was a type of the Messiah. Okay, his reign, his relationship with Yahweh the Father, his position as king over Israel, all these different things are a type and a shadow of the real Messiah, Yahshua, when he came on his first advent, and will come again with his second coming. Okay? I think most people can see that and get their brains around that. I personally believe that. I think David is a type. Okay? So let's follow the typology out a little farther. Okay? Who came before David? King Saul. King Saul was the first king of Israel. Okay? The first anointed king of Israel. So if the typology holds, if David is a type of the real Messiah, and we know from our basic understanding now, this assumes that you are some type of a historicist or a futurist with your eschatology. If you're a preterist, this is all a bunch of nonsense to you. But assuming that you're one of the first two categories there, then if we're going to have the real Messiah come, the fake one, the anti-Messiah, has to come first. Okay? So if David is a type of the real Messiah, Saul came before him. So we could look at Saul as a type of the Antichrist or the anti-Messiah. Okay? Now, hopefully you're tracking with me, and hopefully that makes sense. If that's the case, let's take a look at how Saul, the type of the Antichrist, came to power. I'm going to read 1 Samuel. I'm going to read a couple chapters, so bear with me, but this is all really relevant, and I want to get this in here so you can kind of see my thought process on this. I'm going to read 1 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. Now Nahash the Ammonite came up and besieged Jabesh-Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you." But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, "I will make it with you on this condition, that I will gouge out the right eye of every one of you. Thus I will make it a reproach to all Israel." The elders of Jabesh said to him, "Let us alone for 7 days, that we may send messengers throughout the territory of Israel. Then, if there is no one to deliver us, we will come out to you." Then the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, and spoke these words in the hearing of the people. And all the people lifted up their voices and wept. Now, I want to back up real quick. Nahash is the Hebrew word for serpent, snake. When you go back to Genesis, the serpent in the garden is the Nahash. So you have a king here whose name is Nahash. He's the serpent. He's the serpent king, like literally. Okay? At least as far as his name. I don't think he was like a real serpent, but that's what his name means. Now behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen, and he said, "What is the matter with the people, that they weep?" So they related to him the words of the men of Jabesh. Then the spirit of Elohim came upon Saul mightily when he heard these words, and he became very angry. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces, and he sent them throughout the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, "Whoever does not come out after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen." Then the dread of Yahweh fell on the people, and they came out as one man. He numbered them at Bezek, and the sons of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. They said to the messengers who had come, "Thus you shall say to the men of Jabesh-Gilead, Tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you will have deliverance." So the messengers went and told the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. Then the men of Jabesh said, "Tomorrow we will come out to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you." The next morning Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp at the morning watch, and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. Those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men, that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today Yahweh has accomplished deliverance in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal, and renew the kingdom there." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before Yahweh in Gilgal. There they also offered sacrifices of peace offerings before Yahweh. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Chapter 12. Then Samuel said to all Israel, "Behold, I have listened to your voice and all that you said to me, and I have appointed a king over you. Now here is the king walking before you. But I am old and gray, and behold, my sons are with you. And I have walked before you from my youth even to this day. Here I am. Bear witness against me before Yahweh and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose donkey have I taken, or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed, or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? I will restore it to you." They said, "You have not defrauded us, or oppressed us, or taken anything from any man's hand." He said to them, "Yahweh is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have found nothing in my hand." And they said, "He is witness." Then Samuel said to the people, "It is Yahweh who appointed Moses and Aaron, and who brought your fathers from the land of Egypt. So now take your stand, that I may plead with you before Yahweh concerning all the righteous acts of Yahweh which he did for you and your fathers. When Jacob went into Egypt, and your fathers cried out to Yahweh, then Yahweh sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt, and settled them in this place. But they forgot Yahweh their Elohim. So he sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the army of Hasor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. They cried out to Yahweh and said, We have sinned because we have forsaken Yahweh and have served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. But now deliver us from the hands of our enemies, and we will serve you. Then Yahweh sent Jerubbaal and Badon, and those are actually technically Jerubbaal would be Gideon, and Badon is a misspelling of Barak. We read those in the book of Judges. And Jephthah and Samuel. And he delivered you from the hands of your enemies all around you, so that you lived in security. Now this is the key part. When you saw that Nahash, the king of the sons of Ammon, came against you, you said to me, No, but a king shall reign over us, although Yahweh your Elohim was your king. Now therefore hear, he is the king whom you have chosen, whom you have asked for. And behold, Yahweh has set a king over you. If you will fear Yahweh and serve him, and listen to his voice, and not rebel against the command of Yahweh, then both you and also the king who reigns over you will follow Yahweh your Elohim. If you will not listen to the voice of Yahweh, but rebel against the command of Yahweh, then the hand of Yahweh will be against you as it was against your fathers. Okay, so I'm not going to finish the chapter. That gets as far as I need to go. So, why did the people choose King Saul? They chose him in response to a threat from Nahash, king of the Ammonites, the serpent king. Okay, now if we go back and we kind of look back where we're in the history of this. Okay, we go to Samuel's childhood. Samuel was brought up in the temple, or actually the tabernacle, under the service of Eli, the high priest. Eli's sons were rotten scumbags. They were taking advantage of the people. They were prostituting with women who came to the tabernacle. They were prostituting with women who came to the tabernacle to offer sacrifices. They were taking kickbacks from the people. Okay, sounds a lot like the Catholic laity throughout the ages, really, frankly, right? And there's Protestants involved. You know, you've got your, I could name a gazillion names, but I won't do it for lack of time. But it's a common thing in the clergy, right? Even now. So his sons are scumbags, and so so Samuel becomes the judge, and he acts righteously, and then Samuel gets old. Well, guess what? His sons aren't any better than Eli's. I don't know if they're doing the sexual immorality that they were at the tabernacle, but they were definitely extorting and oppressing the people. Okay, so they weren't really any better than Eli's sons. So the only real difference was Samuel. Well, Samuel's about to die. So the people see this threat come in, and they're like, well, Samuel's this man of Elohim. He's this prophet. He's this awesome guy, and his sons are terrible. What hope do we have? We're just going to keep this thing going. We're just going to keep having, the same system of judges that come in, and some of them are corrupt, and some of them save us, and some of them are corrupt, and some of us save us, and then, they're losing hope. This system is broken to them. I get it. They're looking at their past, and they're like, this isn't working. Now, what they're not realizing is that the reason it's not working is because of their own stiff-neckedness, their hard-heartedness, and their backsliding against Yahweh. That's the reason, and they acknowledge it here. But has Israel ever changed? No. We do it now, collectively, as a people. We've turned our backs against Yahweh and His commandments as a people, and then we look around us and wonder why we're in the mess we're in. He told us we would be in this mess if we forsook His commandments. So sidebar there. Anyway, so because of this, they want to do something different. They want a change. We need a king. Give us a king. We're going to break this cycle. Just give us a king. It's working out so well for the nations around us, so it must be a good thing. And so, Samuel caves and he anoints King Saul. Okay? But the immediate trigger, the immediate thing that causes this response is the threat, the external threat from Nahash, the serpent king of the Ammonites. Okay? Now, had that threat not existed, I don't know if this would have happened at this point. They might have let it go on another generation or two under the system of judges, maybe longer, and they might not have requested a king. But they were at a point where they saw that the system of judges was failing them, at least in their perception, and so they needed to shake it up a little bit. Okay? And so as a result of that, you have the first king of Israel. And as I mentioned earlier, if we're looking at the typology on this, if David is a type of the real Messiah, of Yahshua, and Saul, his predecessor, is a type of the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist, then the serpent king is partly responsible for his rise to power. And what do we see when we look in Revelation 13? Where does the beast get his power from? The dragon, the serpent. Is that a coincidence? Now we look at it in terms typically of, the beast, whatever this is, the real power behind his reign is coming from Satan, coming from the from the dragon, right? The serpent. But, you could also look at it, in this case, where did King Saul get his power from? You could attribute it directly to the king of Ammon, the Nahash, because he was responsible for Saul's rise to power, at least in an indirect kind of way. He was the catalyst for it. So I think with the typology, we can see, and I realize you have to be open-minded about this. This is not your typical, this is not your typical thing that you're going to hear. But I really do think there's something to it. And I think that if you consider yourself a watchman, then, if you're a watchman sitting on a wall and you have identified a list of specific things to watch for, like let's say you have 5 potential bad guys you're watching for, and you're only watching for those 5 bad guys. Well, what if a 6th bad guy comes? You're not looking for him. He's going to sneak right on through, I think if you're a watchman, you have to be open to any threat, any possible threat. You have to be able to recognize and identify as a threat, which means you have to be open-minded to the idea that a threat may not present itself in a way that you think it will, right? Sometimes, that foreign marauder might come up to your gate disguised as your own citizens, in disguise. Look at the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse, oh, it's this awesome gift. They love us. This is great. Not so great. Not so great for the citizens of Troy, So, but they weren't thinking. They weren't even processing, oh, this could be a threat to us. They had that's why it was such a successful attack, was because they didn't see it coming, And so if we think that, oh yes, yeah, we finally defeated the New World Order, this is great, Trump, Farage, whoever the players are, that lead this push against the NWO, against the globalists, against Bilderberg, against whatever, and if we finally defeat it, and it's like, yeah, this is great, because you have this concept in Christianity, not all the way through it, but you have this dominionist concept, where it's our job to conquer the world for Christ. Well, that's exactly what it would look like. You would have Christians rising in Christian nations and overthrowing, the left, overthrowing Islam, overthrowing the New World Order and everything, and making Christianity great again. Right? That's a victory. If let's be honest, that would be great. I would love to see, and I have my issues with mainstream Christianity. I do, but as far as just basic morality, I would love to see that dominate the world. Love your neighbor as yourself. Help the poor. All the good stuff in there, and not to mention the crux of the gospel message about Yahshua, dying for our sins. I would love to see that dominate the world. I would. But I think that in this case, when it does, it's going to be that Trojan horse deception. It's going to look like the real thing, but it's not going to be the real thing. And so I think as we start to see the dominoes fall on the NWO, on the powers that be, and we start to kind of get excited, I'm kind of thinking that might be the time to kind of wake up a little bit and kind of be a little bit more pensive, because that could be, we could have already been deceived by the obvious at that point. We could have already anointed Saul as our king based on the threat, that we had to fight against. And Saul wasn't the king that Israel needed. It was David. But Yahweh allowed them to go through that process with him. Saul started off great. He was a good king to start. No issues with him at first. And then he kind of got crazy. And then the whole thing went down from there. And then, he had the thing where, they were going to battle. Samuel tells him, "Hey, I'm going to be back in 7 days. Just don't go without me." Well, he's running late. He doesn't get there in 7 days. So what does Saul do? Saul takes it upon himself to make the sacrifices that Samuel would have made. Well, he's not a Levite. He was a Benjamite. He's not authorized to do that. You could make the case that someone who is of the Melchizedek order could have possibly done that, but there's no indication that Saul was. So he had zero license to make these sacrifices, and yet he took it upon himself as the king to do so. Okay? And I see that as a type even of the abomination of desolation. Doing something unauthorized, profaning, like bringing that strange fire, so to speak, and doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, that causes the destruction. It causes the downfall. The abomination that causes desolation is the more literal translation of that. So it's a cause and effect relationship. So I see types all through here, guys, and I think that if we're watchmen, if we're looking out for our families, if we're looking out for our loved ones, if we're looking out for our tribe, our society here, that we have to be open-minded to this, and we have to look around and be like, there could be more to the picture than what we've just kind of always thought. If we see, if we see the New World Order starting to crumble, we see that starting to go down. Yes, that's great news, but I think that once the new sheriff comes into town after that point, I think we're going to be in for a rude awakening. I really do. So that's all I wanted to get into tonight. At some point, I have some YouTube stuff up. If you want to go there and just kind of watch some of the videos, I touch on my thoughts on the anti-Messiah, on Christianity in the end times. And I just want to make it clear that, and I say this every chance I get it, if you're watching this and you're a Christian, I'm not attacking you. I have no issue with you. My issue is with mainstream institutional Christianity and its doctrine and its teachings, specifically in regards to Yahweh's commandments. I think that there's a reason why the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, is called those things. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. When you look at your Bible as a whole, lawlessness is always associated with Yahweh's people not keeping His commandments. It just always is. And Christianity, institutional Christianity, teaches, in spite of what Yahshua himself said in Matthew chapter 5, that he did away with the law, with Yahweh's Torah, with his commandments. He said himself that he didn't come to do that. But yet it's taught ad nauseum all through Christianity that he did. And so I don't think it's any big stretch that if that form of Christianity, that Pauline Christianity, takes on the left and wins and comes to power, that could be what we're looking at as the beast in Revelation, the man of lawlessness, and you would have signs and wonders linked with the second beast, and all these different things there that we see taking place in mainstream Christianity. What version do I study from? Several. I won't PM you. I mean, I guess I can later, but I mainly use the New American Standard just because I find it the easiest to read. I'm transitioning back over to, because the NASB is, when the New Testament comes from the Westcott Hort text, I'm kind of more skeptical of that text going forward just because of, I'm not sure if it's as reliable as the majority text that like your KJV, your NKJV are from. So I'm kind of in a spot to where, like, when I get into New Testament, I'm kind of using my New King James more. But for Old Testament, I typically would just stay with my NASB. As far as study, I also get into the Septuagint. I think that that's a valuable resource. It's not bulletproof. It's not the best thing ever, but it does have some really good stuff in there, because the Masoretic Hebrew that our English Bibles pull from, that goes back to the Middle Ages. That's as old as it gets. The Aleppo Codex, I think, was 1008 AD, give or take. That's the oldest manuscripts we have in the vowel-pointed Masoretic Hebrew. And then, you go back before that, you get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, which predate, 0 AD. Well, there is no year 0, but they predate Christ, right? Even older than that is the Septuagint in Greek. So it's not flawless, but it's the oldest basically that we have. So I think it's worth using in our toolbox when we study. Apart from that, just the various concordances and lexicons, Josephus and whatever for history. Nothing too crazy there. Anyway, if you still want more information, just let me know. PM me or whatever, and I'll get you in touch with more stuff. Anyway, that's all I had tonight. I will go into more depth probably later here on Facebook and not on YouTube about my ideas on Christianity in the last days. Just because I think we all come from Christianity in some capacity, so I think it's really relevant. If that actually ends up being the Trojan horse, I think we need to be on the lookout for it. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hopefully this wasn't too much of a mess. Like I said, it is kind of abstract. Hopefully I was able to get it out in words in a way that makes sense and is actually intelligible. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Private message me, call me if you have my number. Whatever. Anyway, good night, everyone. I'm probably going to head to bed. It's been it's been an awesome Sabbath, by the way. I saw some friends I haven't seen in a while. Had a nice time. I just love the Sabbath more and more. I'm so thankful to Yahweh that He had the wisdom and the foresight to set that day aside for His creation, right at the beginning of that creation, and He made it holy, and He gave it to us as a day to step out of this world and to just kind of just come back into just one foot in the garden, if you will. We can't fully get back into paradise, at least not now, but it just kind of gives a slight taste of what that might be like to just have that complete, just refreshing rest that we all need, right? I mean, we all need a day off. How many times do we say, "Oh, I need a day off"? Well, our Father wants us to take a day off, 1 in 7, on the 7th day of the week. If you haven't made a commitment to keep the Sabbath, I encourage you with as much love as I can to just give it a shot. Take a day off on Saturday if you're not already off on Saturday. Hang out at your house, read your Bible, study, hang out with the kids, maybe watch some Bible movies, fellowship with other believers. I mean, there's no this isn't Pharisaic Judaism. There's not this long list of do's and don'ts for Sabbath. I mean, really, in the Bible, it's rest. Don't do your job. Don't go to work on Sabbath. You know, don't kindle a fire specifically, and there's different interpretations on what that means. That's basically it. I mean, we can all pretty much do that. I mean, if you're a first responder or something like that in a critical service area, I get it. But most of us can do it. And it's a blessing to do it. And we're honoring our Father by acknowledging His sovereignty over time, by taking one day out of that time and giving it over to Him. So anyway, good night, everyone, and I'll get back in on some point and talk about the other stuff I mentioned. Anyway, yeah, good night.